Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view. Today I'm looking at the Ultimate X-Men, the second part of the Ultimate X-Men from issues 34 to 65 from 2003 to 2006. What's it about? Well, it's the alternate take on the X-Men from the Ultimate World. And the first 12 issues, it's a 12-issue block written by Brian Michael Bendis and illustrated by David Finch. Love David Finch's artwork. It's got a lot of depth to it, a lot of certain amount of realism, a lot of detail to it. I love the action scenes and the way that he composes his panels. Top-notch artwork. As far as the story, well, Bendis is writing two blocks, two arcs, and this first one is called Blockbuster. And Wolverine's out in New York, trying to find elements of his past. Somebody is after him, and they do an all-out assault on him, and he crawls away looking to heal, and he crawls to the only person he knows in New York, which happens to be Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. And then they have a moment together where they talk about things. I really like the way Bendis deals with Spider-Man. He's been writing Ultimate Spider-Man, and that's a great series. He really captures that whole 1960s idea of Spider-Man, where he was an awkward, gawky teenager who found himself with these powers and then was just trying to do the right thing. Often he makes mistakes, and often he doesn't know exactly what he's doing, but he's giving it his best shot. And I liked his naivete in certain situations and his unfamiliarity with situations. It's like he's seeing this for the first time, and and it shocks him a little bit because he is a teenager that even though he's seen a great deal as Spider-Man, some of what he sees here is just not mind blowing, but it certainly gives him pause. The interaction between Wolverine and Spider-Man is great. The pacing allows for this relationship to develop while telling the story of those in pursuit of Wolverine. Being in New York, they brush up against Hell's Kitchen, and in Hell's Kitchen there is a guardian, and his name is Daredevil. Now, Bendis has written Daredevil in the main universe, and I found that Daredevil under Bendis's guide was troubled. This is not a troubled Daredevil. This is a stern Daredevil. This is a man without fear. He has less strength than anybody involved here. Wolverine, Spider-Man, the antagonists, and yet he stands firm. Says, "Listen, I'm the guardian of Hell's Kitchen. You're not getting in here. Get out." He's not even really concerned about Wolverine being pursued, or says, that's not my circus. That's not my monkeys. That's on you. Just keep it out of the kitchen. And I love the way that these three work together. And I would have liked more of that. I would have liked if maybe this was the three here had to make the resolution that to bring an end to this conflict, but that doesn't happen. What happens is that the X-Men are called in, so we get to see the rest of the X-Men. And included in that is kind of a reveal of the Phoenix Force. Jean sort of unleashes it, unsuspecting, and it surprises and shocks her, and you're not exactly sure how to deal with it afterwards. That's for future issues, but it is a powerful moment and really changes the character of Jean because of it. I really like this first arc. Again, it sort of takes two different tones. One was a street level, and then we get into the high-powered Phoenix level. So his second arc was called New Mutants, and he introduces a number of new mutants here. They don't get they don't get a lot of page time in here. Some of it is just an introduction, like we're introduced to Havoc and to Dazzler, and we get to see Polaris, but we don't get to see her in action. And of course, we get the Angel, and again, I like some of the characters and some of the development of characters and how it differs from what was written in the main universe. I mean, the Angel he's one of these guys that just I don't want to fight. I'm not a fighter. That's not really what I want to do, which is interesting because I do appreciate when they take a look at some of these characters and they have different opinions and different desires for what it is they want to do in life. one of the stories that brought probably the most controversy for the Ultimate X-Men line was this one here, issue number 41. And of all the books, this is the best standalone story. Now, I really liked all that Spider-Man and Daredevil and Wolverine stuff, and I really liked all the stuff that Mark Millar was writing in the first batch. But as a single, standalone story that requires nothing else, this is the story to read. Even if you're not an X-Men fan or an Ultimate X-Men fan, I recommend that when you're flipping through those dollar bins and you find issue number 41 of the Ultimate X-Men, pick it up. It's a slow burn sort of thing. It's the only major X-Men involved in this whole story is Wolverine, and he's going to deal with a character, and we build up the character for the first half of the book, who wakes up to discover that he's a mutant, and unfortunately he's got some sort of like toxic energy or whatever that radiates from his body and kills anything organic. And he ends up, killing a few people just by being. And so there's a resolution as to how to handle that situation. And this is that book about it. Now, some people, the controversy is that people said, no, Professor X would never have allowed this thing to happen. That's not how they do it. They could have found a better solution instead of what they found. Maybe so, but that's not what happened. So it's interesting to read that and make your own opinion about what you think is the right choice or the wrong choice. I really liked this singular issue. Now, the rest of the stuff, that's sort of a standalone and doesn't really come back. It comes back a little bit in bits and pieces, but pretty much that's just a standalone issue. This one, this whole arc about the New Mutants is the fact that the government is now, the administration, the president is now siding with the idea of being mutant friendly. Emma Frost is one of the New Mutants that is introduced, and she says, education over conflict. Like, let's educate the world about how, the humans and mutants can work together. And the president's on board with this. Well, there's a faction within the U.S. government that says, that's a bunch of crap. Mutants are all bad. They all need to be destroyed. So a plot is hatched within the government, from higher up in the government, to squash, this new initiative by the president. And so the Sentinels are called out when the president is making an announcement. The president's life is put in jeopardy. The X-Men, fight the Sentinels, and the activity of this other faction is revealed. And that's the end of it. What's interesting is that, the X-Men truly saved the day here. They didn't call the Sentinels here. They were just, but the Sentinels arrived and they were in a process of, almost like assassinating the president. And they stopped all of that. But they sort of go away, in secret as if they've done something wrong. But that's not how I saw it. I thought that they would be regarded somewhat as heroes of the situation. But Bendis tends to write it as that, perhaps that the public, now that they've seen the full extent of their powers, has an even greater fear, and the divide becomes even more pronounced. I didn't see it that way, but that's how it's written, so we'll go with that. That division between human and mutants wasn't strengthened by this, it was weakened. And that's the end of Bendis's run, which I really liked. Just these two story blocks, 12 issues long, David Finch artwork. Really enjoyed the Bendis material. And then we get Brian K. Vaughan. Brian K. Vaughan writes the next batch of stories. Brian K. Vaughan, you might know from Why the Last Man, or he wrote Saga. He's a capable and good writer. Some people, he's like perhaps even one of their favorite writers. He's not one of my favorite writers, but I like what he has to write. So I'm interested to see where he goes with this. And so his first block is this thing called Tempest, which introduces Sinister. I don't think he's called Mr. Sinister. I think he's just called Sinister. And he's just an assassin who works for Apocalypse. And Apocalypse, big villain, all that sort of stuff. Whether or not Apocalypse comes back in the future, I don't know. But during this particular run, this is just, Vaughan only introduces Apocalypse and then leaves that storyline alone. And I found that there was some about his work as well. So It was a fine little 4-issue series, and we got to see this mutant bounty hunter assassin type of guy named Sinister. That's about the call. Nothing really about the Phoenix. I mean, it's touched on in a couple of little light conversations. Nothing about the growing divide between mutant and human. That doesn't really develop. Just this story about an assassin hunting down mutants. The work is by Brendan Peterson, and I found with Brendan Peterson's artwork, I really like David Finch stuff. I found a certain realism and a lot of detail, and this is like one step lower than that. Certainly a lot of again, attention to a certain degree of realism and detail, just not at the same level as David Finch. Fine artwork, but just a little bit lighter. I'm going to show you this one cover that's part of it. I thought this was a good cover of Iceman, and that's the other thing I'll mention about the covers as well. I like covers that just have the character posed on the cover. I think some of those can be really sharp, but I also like covers that show you something about what's going on inside. And most of these covers don't do that. They're just poses. So I would like them to get back to mixing it up a bit, but it's not. For the most part, it's just posed covers. So the second storyline by Brian Vaughan, it's also illustrated by somebody different. Andy Kubert does the next block. And again, I will say this about Andy Kubert, he's one step lower than Brendan Peterson as far as realism and detail is concerned. Still good artist, but again, one step lower. This is all about Gambit and Rogue and the Van Strucker twins, who run the billionaire company, Fenris Corporation. This is for me the weakest of the stories, because I didn't like necessarily. I didn't like Gambit's approach to it. I didn't like the fact that it was so rushed. The plan by these billionaire twins is really bad, and Gambit going along with it doesn't make a lot of sense. He knows Rogue, and the whole idea is kidnap Rogue, bring her to Fenris, get her to work with her because she'll be an excellent spy. And it's like, where did that come from? How much do you know about Rogue? And why would Gambit not just approach her because he knows her and just talk to her about that? There's so much that didn't make any kind of logical sense, especially for this couple, this power couple that have probably worked out so many different things just to go on the lam and go kidnap her and whatever. And even in the whole kidnapping situation, to get away from the X-Men because they're at a carnival at this time, Gambit blows off a Ferris wheel off its moorings and sends it careening down the midway. And later on, he goes on to say, well, I knew nobody would get hurt because you X-Men would stop it. How do you know? How do you know that? You can't know that. You're taking a pretty big risk with a lot of people's lives. The X-Men can do their best to try and save everybody, but they may not. Maybe, when Colossus is trying to stop that Ferris wheel from rolling any further, some of the metal buckles. And one of those cars on the far side just drops 15 feet, but it crumples a bit and sends a shaft of metal through somebody's heart who's sitting in the thing. How do you know? You don't know. So it's a really bad call on your part to try and get away and convince Rogue that, you guys all had it all in the bag. Rogue actually plays pretty close to character, and I like that about her. And it's like, and I would have preferred it a little bit more if she called him out on that. Like, that's bullshit. You can't do that. But in the end, Rogue decides that she's going to go with Gambit and find a new life. And again, that one just didn't ring a great deal of truth. I mean, he kidnaps her basically, and she suffered through all of that sort of stuff with the Weapon X. I can't imagine that she I don't see what the attraction is between these two characters. I can see Gambit's not infatuation, but his lust for Rogue. Sure, I can get behind that. I understand where he's coming from that, but I don't understand what she sees in him, especially as I say when he kidnaps her and he puts all these lives in danger. And I also think it's a little strange that Rogue is very religious, or is depicted as being a more religious character in this version of the Ultimate X-Men, and that seems to have been abandoned by the time we get to the end of this story arc, which is unfortunate because I really liked that approach. She had some issues with Angel. She looks at him and says, "This is like an angel," and then she would point to Nightcrawler and says, "And there's a demon. Do you not see that, something, the apocalypse is coming because angels or demons are now walking the earth? Do you not see that?" So she has that, in her background, in her mindset. But that's really not explored. And now she's running off with this thief to become, with the person that kidnapped her. Anyways, not my favorite of the story arcs. Well, the next story arc goes into the Most Dangerous Game, where we're introduced to Longshot. And there's a couple of changes around here. And here we're introduced to a new artist, Stuart Immonen. Stuart Immonen. I like his material, but again, this is like one step lower in the reality or realism and detail than Andy Kubert. So it keeps going down, and I don't think this is his finest work. It's a little bit more animated or than some of his other material, and it works okay for here. Actually, the long shot, this first block that he does here is probably the best that I find that is of his work. It doesn't necessarily get better. It doesn't really get worse, but I think this is maybe the strongest bit. But it's a story about Longshot here. So we're introduced to Longshot, Spiral, Mojo, and it's follows a similar tract. There are a few changes here about who's the villain and who's the hero. But it gives you a chance to introduce to Longshot, and the characters, the X-Men themselves, get a chance to flex some of their opinions on mutants and what's going on there. I don't think either party was right or wrong on this. You have to decide that for yourself. But Longshot does play an effect, or have an effect on some of the future stories. There was a one shot here. This is a new artist that just does a one shot, and that's Steve Dillon. And this is all about Professor X and how he does some mind manipulation and stomps a bank robbery and does that sort of stuff. I have some issues with Professor X, and he does this a couple of times, even within this sort of series. Is that he speaks of that I would never go inside your mind and figure it all out. That's unless I need to, and he does, because I forgot to mention that at the end of Bendis's run, the Beast dies, and this really affects Storm. She was offered, and she gets upset about certain things, and when she goes off, Professor X says to Angel. Well, actually, no, it's the other way around. It's when Angel takes off because he's upset about situations. He calls upon Aurora to go and speak to him because he knows that Angel finds her attractive. Now, that could just be his perception, but I don't think he's that perceptive. But I think it's because he, touched inside his mind and found that, there's this. Well, that's an invasion, buddy. That's what we're talking about, you invading people's minds. And now getting back to that whole idea about the Beast dying, he does die at the end of Bendis' run, and Aurora does get upset and does a couple of rebound things and situations. But her story continues with Wolverine. And that's where this one comes in. Wolverine and Aurora have a two-issue sort of situation. I think they develop a better understanding of one another. And this is Deathstrike that they face off against. And there's a 2-issue thing. This is actually, more in line with that whole idea of presenting a cover where some of the action on the cover is what happens between the cover, on those pages. There is an annual that involves Rogue and Gambit, and Juggernaut returns for this sort of situation. Yeah. And the final story arc is something called Magnetic North, where Magneto's group is getting together to free Magneto. The story was good. I enjoyed it. I have some issues with it. I have some issues with a lot of the Brian Vaughan stuff, in that I don't know how these people know these things or do these things. The logic, I know it's a comic book, but the logic doesn't just add up for me. How does Magneto know that what his group is planning? He's got no contact with them, and yet he's very confident that this is very soon they're going to be breaking me out of here because of this. Did he have some sort of plans in motion? Did he know about the prison that he was going to be placed in? There's just a lot of elements in this storyline that don't add up for me. Lorna Dane is Polaris. She's framed for murder. And where is she thrown? She's thrown into the same cell as Magneto because, she has magnetic powers. So she's claiming her innocence and saying, I didn't do it. But right away, she's just thrown into the same cell as Magneto, a mass murderer terrorist guy. So we're taking this teenager and throwing her with her powers into the same cell. Because it's the only cell of its kind. It's a plastic box with ventilation. How hard would it be to build a second one? Okay, but no, she gets thrown into the same cell as Magneto. And as far as how her powers went askew and all this sort of stuff, that was set up by Forge, who's this master engineer in electronics, but yet he's caught on camera from 3 days earlier. A full face so we can do a facial recognition. Even when he's caught dropping this magnetic bomb blast thing that's going to make, Polaris's powers go wild, Emma Frost immediately identifies it. How? How did you know what that was and what it was supposed to do? That does not exonerate Lorna until you figure out what it is. But right away, that's what it is. How? I don't know. I don't know a lot about some of these situations. How did Magneto know? I mean, the whole idea was that there was going to be a fire set. Lorna Dane as Polaris would be there to help, save some people. And then they would switch on the electromagnet thing because they knew at this time. Sure, I can get that they set the fire. But how did they know Lorna Dane was going to be sent over? I mean, that was a call. She may not have gone over. But, they're flipping the switch and there she's, going to go over there, and so they knew all of this sort of stuff was going to happen. How did you know? You didn't know. You were just gambling on that. And yet Magneto talks as if he knows that this is... Anyways. So there's just a cover of Magneto. The two brothers, Alex and Cyclops, do face off against one another. This is about the first time that they really go at it in the Ultimate X-Men, and we get to see some of their attitudes and some of them what they have to say, and it's not bad. The story itself is actually pretty good. As I say, some of the leaps in well, I don't know if it's logic, but the leaps that they're taking in this storytelling to the conveniences or the coincidences or whatever the situations are, I find that they're just a little too often and too strong. All of this stuff could have been developed. Even going back to the Von Strucker twins who, decided that kidnapping Rogue is the way to go. Like perhaps if we had an issue or two or something where we developed that and they looked into Rogue's history and they had here's the reasoning that we think that this will work. But it's not. It's just slap that. The Ultimates get involved, which is nice to see that there's a bit of a crossover there with the Ultimates, so we get to see that. And then we get to see the final resolution where it seems as if everything is back to normal and Magneto's back in his cage. But is he? I don't think so. And Longshot has a say in this sort of situation as well. So that's the end of Brian K. Vaughan's run, and then we'll move on to, I think it's Kirkman, Robert Kirkman, who did The Walking Dead and whatever, that takes over from here on in. So that's it. That's it for this part of the Ultimate X-Men Part 2. Question is it worth the read? Well, if you like the Ultimate X-Men, then yes, it's worth a read. I really like the Brian Michael Bendis stuff more than I like the Brian K. Vaughan stuff, but the Brian K. Vaughan stuff is okay. It's not as strong, but it's not bad. I really like the single issue number 41 of Brian Michael Bendis, and even if you're not an Ultimate X-Men fan, I do think you should read that one. But if you're not into the Ultimate Universe and you're not into the Ultimate X-Men, then no. This story is based on character and some of the familiar characters and their powers and their abilities. It really is a very X-Men book. It doesn't tackle issues much beyond the X-Men universe. For a collector, well, again, it's an ultimate. Ultimate takes on all of these characters. Does it matter that it's an ultimate Longshot or ultimate Spiral or ultimate Dazzler makes their first appearances in any of this sort of stuff? I don't think it makes any difference. All of these books were dollar bin books. Even going back to even the first issue of Ultimate X-Men, they're all dollar bin books. So you're collecting it for the Ultimate Universe and Alternate X-Men for your various reasons. David Finch, from Brian Michael Bendis, Vaughan. So there are reasons to collect it. As far as speculation and investment, I don't see that here because it's, as I said, we're getting later into the Ultimate X-Men run. All of this stuff is going to be $1 a piece. It's going to be in a dollar bin or two for $1 or something like that. So it's really not a spec and investment type of book. It's a fun read. I've been enjoying this read. I think it's started to slow down a little bit with the Brian Vaughan material. We'll see if Robert Kirkman can pick it back up. But in the meantime, it's not a bad read. That's it. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. Hey, we'll talk again soon.